Kia ora, and welcome to the Hoon on the Kaka to Nick Maier, who is the General Manager of FortHill, a property fund that was founded by Calder Stewart and has made an interesting announcement, I think. Firstly, it's planning to raise $50 million to expand across the North and South Island. It already has $432 million of funds under management and is also the owner of a bunch of industrial property buildings, in particular sort of sheds and warehouses. Nick, thanks very much for coming on to the show. Could you tell us what you're planning with your properties around upgrading them and putting solar panels on some of their roofs?
Bernard, thanks for having me. And yeah, look, I think this is a great topic as to what's happening in the kind of green space, what's happening in the renewable energy space, and sort of where is this all tracking. We have a vast amount of roof space that sits within that portfolio. And, as you've probably seen and other people see, either from the ground or in the air, when you fly over industrial areas, it looks like a big sea of roofs. One of the things that's happened globally is people have looked at that real estate space on top of the roof and said, well, gee, what else can we do on there? And you're right. What you've got inside of a building is you've got a tenant who's using some electricity. You've got sun shining on the top of it. And why don't you put those two things together? So look, we've been looking at this for probably about 6 or 7 years. In a really basic sense, if you want to retrofit an old building, that can be a bit of an expensive exercise because there's kind of a weight per square meter of the panels and the bits and pieces that go with it. So part of what Calder Stewart has been doing as a development and construction business is essentially pre-strengthening the buildings when they build them. So at no cost to people that we build for, we make sure that the roofs can take that extra little bit of load. And it's not a lot, but retrofitting it is not the right way to do that. It just makes the economics of it a lot harder. So if you start with a building that can take a little bit of extra load, that's a good starting place. What you're then kind of looking at in terms of the basic equation is it'd be great to cover the entire roof with panels. Love that. That works really well in a building where you've got a lot of energy consumption. So if you've got an office building, 10 stories, 20 stories tall, very small roof compared to how much energy is being used in that building. If you've got a cool store, same thing. They run the chillers and coolers all day long. And even with modern equipment that is way more efficient than the old stuff, you still have quite a lot of energy consumption on site. So those buildings are the first ones you want to roll out to. Those are the places where you want to start and say, what can we do on site to supply here on site? Once you get past that, and this is actually the majority of roofs around the place, you actually start to look at, if I want to just use what's on site, it's a relatively smaller amount of the roof that kind of makes sense to use. And so again, it'll depend on what they're doing in the building, how big the office might be. A lot of the buildings today and for the last number of years have moved to electrifying everything. So you no longer have little gas-powered forklifts running around. You've got electric charged forklifts running around. Some folks are rolling out EV cars and chargers in the parking lot. Yep, that's great. And there's good software and hardware that kind of link all those things up. But you're only using a small part of the roof footprint. There's a great example. The Foodstuffs Group at Auckland Airport built their massive new distribution center. It's kind of one of the biggest buildings around, and it's got a very large office component to it. That would be 3 or 4 years ago, and it has one of the biggest solar arrays around. When you look at that, it's actually, as best I can tell, it's only about 10% of the roof space, and it's basically sized to accommodate the office. So why is that? Why is distributed generation, which is what these things are, rather than one big power plant supplying through a big pipe, you go to lots of little power supply sources and bits and pieces? How does that work? You've actually got a pipe constraint. So you'll have a transformer and you'll have a line into any given site. And so on sites like the ones we have, where you might have, let's say, a 10 or 20,000 square meter building, so it has quite a large roof footprint. First, you kind of look at which angles it faces in the sun and all the various bits and pieces. That gives you what you can actually put on the roof. There's a bit of gear on those roofs, like heating and cooling units and stuff and vents. So take out a little bit of space. So 100% is not really achievable or rarely achievable. But then you come back to what are you going to use on site, and then how much can you actually get off site without having to upgrade the pipes and the transformers and the lines and all the various bits and pieces. Then you're kind of into the unit math, and I'd say why are we doing it? The math makes sense now. It has for a couple of years. Australia went through this process a number of years ago. Their power consumption is very different. They consume a lot during the day. It's hotter. They use more air conditioning, etc. So solar made a lot of sense for them. They kind of oversupplied, so their midday power is actually, I should know all of the exact current statistics, but there have been points in time where their midday power is actually relatively cheap. In New Zealand, our power peaks are in the winter, in the morning and evening when everyone wakes up and it's cold and you turn everything on, including the tea kettle, and have a hot shower when you get home and all those kinds of things. So our power peaks don't nicely line up with the time when the sun is shining. But that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. You still have plenty of good sunshine throughout the year. Even on a cloudy day, you can get really good generation out of these assets. It's not just when it's a blue sky day. So it does make sense. It makes sense depending on what your tenant is doing in their building. Then it makes sense based on how much of it you can take out and sell into the wider grid. And then you kind of get into some bigger pieces of math around how much can I get either in the spot market or from a retailer, and it goes from there. So that's the sort of world as we see it. You get into some layers of complexity like the operation of the local network, which is a lines company. Then you get into some other complexities. I think you asked who owns that relationship. How does that work with the customer? As a landlord, we actually don't own the power relationship. Usually, if you're in a mall, like a Westfield Mall or a Centre building or a big office building, there may be one pipe coming in, and then that is sub-metered down to all the tenants. So there may be a role that the landlord is playing there in terms of the actual passing through or passing on of that power. In an industrial building like what we have in our portfolio, that's not typically the case. Typically, the tenant picks whatever retailer they want and away they go. So we've got an added layer of complexity there to deal with because we have to work with the tenant. They have to want to have that on-site supply, and we have to offer them a deal that's either as good or better than what they're getting from their whoever their power provider is. So there are a few different layers of complexity in there for us.
Yeah, I'm curious about that, because part of the problem with people who are tenants in a building owned by someone else who may want to install solar is that, they don't have control of the building. They can't just, whack up a ladder and decide to put them on without without the permission of the building owner. And secondly, the building owner isn't actually a consumer of power. It's the tenant, and therefore doesn't have the direct relationship with the buyer, isn't the buyer of electricity. So and normally, industrial property, people like to keep it simple. I'm the owner of the building. You're my tenant. I charge you rent per square meter of the building, and you pay me every month. So how are you doing it? Are you the one who owns the panels on top of the roof? Are you the one who sells the electricity? Do you have your own contract with the tenant? Are you able to sell surplus into the grid or sell it to someone else? How does it work there?
It's a great question. Look, FortHill Property lens on this is relatively simple. We are an industrial building owner. As you said, we're most interested in the property market, where rents are going in there, keeping our tenants happy, doing those sorts of things. So what we've actually done is we've partnered with Calder Stewart Energy, who, having built the buildings, they've thought about the design, they've thought about what you can do, and we have an arrangement where they basically rent the roof space off of us. So it means that as an industrial landlord, I don't have to worry about the capital expense of the panels. I don't have to expose my investors to, or our investors to, some variation in power prices or other bits and pieces, and add a whole lot of let's call it energy sector risk into what should just be property sector returns. So what we've done is we've partnered with an energy company who has the capital and the backing to come and roll out solar panels on the roofs. They are good at it. They know what they're doing. They build these things at scale. We've got some 25 kilowatt systems already gone in, some 50 kilowatt systems gone in. And as you, I think, mentioned at the beginning, we've got 20 buildings. And if we do the rollout across those, you kind of look at 8,000 panels, and the numbers become kind of impressive and they sound really big. And we like that. So across that rollout and over time, we will receive a little bit of rent from that. The analogy that I draw for that is it's a little bit like when they were rolling out cell phone towers and they'd come around to different people and say, we'd like to rent a bit of space on your building and put up a cell phone tower. Thanks. Building owners don't want to become mobile network providers. That's not our business, but we're happy to rent you some space because we're in the business of renting space. So if we can rent a bit of the roof space where we were getting nothing before, then that's a great outcome. There are different landlords out there that do slightly different things. I think there are some who have done the panels themselves, and then they've done a deal with their tenants around either that power, or they've used it as, hey, look, you can save some money on your power, so why don't we use that as something to do with your lease or other aspects.
Yeah, so Calder Stewart Energy, if you like, becomes the new electricity retailer, and are able to, put panels on these sheds, these big warehouses, which are very popular. There's huge demand, good rental growth because we all want to buy things on various platforms and get them delivered. And of course, logistics is a growth industry. I keep telling my kids they need to get into logistics. So that's interesting. A new type of electricity retailer. Do you expect, not that it's your responsibility, but do you expect that the likes of Calder Stewart Energy will then go to the tenant of the building and say, hey, have I got a deal for you?
That's exactly right. Look, Calder Stewart Energy is probably a step away from being a retailer. There's a whole legislative process and bits and pieces that sit around that. The simplest model, and the one that we are starting with, is the one which basically just says, look, we'll put some panels up. We'll size that to fit the building. It may not be 100% of the roof. We'll do a power purchase agreement with the tenant, which is basically just, look, if you've got a 6, 10, 15-year lease, would you look at signing up for a fixed power price or something like that for the same period of time? Take a bunch of risk out of your the inflation in your electricity bill and all those things that we sort of hear about every couple of years or every winter, every time there's a crazy spike and people have to shut down their operations. So the model that we can use is available to our tenants, which we think is a great thing for our tenants, is, hey, we can supply you some of your power. You'll still need a retailer, but we can take some risk out of that. We can supply you a volume of electricity and energy, and we can come up with a commercial structure that works for you. That's based on, we produce it, you buy it. And look, after that, you just get into complexities of the same thing that a homeowner can get or any other business owner can get, which is, if you have surplus, can you sell it? What will the retailer give you? How do you do all of that? So some of this is to do with the regulation here in New Zealand. I'd love to see us probably move to, I don't remember the exact technical term, but it's multi-retailer on sort of single point of contact. There other places in the world, throughout Europe, I think it's much more common that you might have one retailer that sells you nighttime power. You might have one retailer that sells you some other power. You can choose to sign up with somebody who promises to give you only green energy and not coal or nuclear or wherever else it's coming from. So different markets have different levels of development, and some of that is not enabled here in New Zealand to do with the underlying legislation. As I understand it, it's been around for quite a few years. So I think different governments have done work looking at that, and there might have even been the odd pilot here or there. But it's probably, there is a role for regulation in this to probably open up some of these models a little bit further.
And how are the lines companies playing ball? Because you're putting some big new warehouses in, and you'll need to connect them up to the network in some form. Someone's going to do some digging. There's going to be some ditches, and some people in high vis in new Toyota Hiluxes are going to come along and do some stuff. So how are the lines companies? Because sometimes they quite like to load up their capital costs onto their new customers.
It's a great question. FortHill Property and Calder Stewart, FortHill tends to buy new buildings, so we're already typically in areas where all that work is going on. I think I mentioned that the best time to do all of this is the same day you build a building. So that model is one that we're sort of moving rapidly towards, which is, hey, let's do the panels at the beginning. Let's get this all done. So part of that is about minimizing all of that time and coming back to site and doing all those things that are inefficient. So we're already working with the lines companies. They're actually a partner in new development in terms of rolling out new areas or a new building or what have you. So that part of it's okay. I think probably to give them a little bit their due, one of their big requirements is to make sure that your power stays on 99.99% of the time. And so they really do have a responsibility to make sure that they're achieving that first. So they, and look, it'll vary region by region, whether it's Vector in Auckland or here in Christchurch or, what have you. They've all got programs looking at this stuff. They're all familiar with it. But it does come down to, we talk about the transformer at the corner of the street that goes to our building. Then there's like a local network that has another substation, and then there's another bigger connection somewhere. So there are a whole lot of layers in that they're trying to manage at the same time. And there's some really little funny problems, which are, you think you can keep all this stuff turned on and it'll make wonderful resilience in the event that the power goes out. But sometimes the power goes out and these guys have to go work on the lines. And they think they've got it turned off upstream, but if there's power flowing in downstream, you've actually got some health and safety risks in all of that. So look, the lines companies are a partner for us in all of this. They've got their job to do. We're trying to innovate and do something, as I said, distributed generation. In a perfect world, we'd be able to cover a roof with panels and sell it to anybody in the neighborhood. Practically speaking, that's a little more difficult. And I think, again, it goes back a little bit to some of those legislative pieces as well, as it's not just the local lines companies, but there are a number of people that need to work together to, let's call it, turn on this technology and this opportunity. It exists elsewhere in the world. I think that's why you see some of the there are farm-based solar panels and things going in where people are coming in and saying, we're going to cover a whole lot of paddocks, we'll plug it in somewhere. That's not distributed generation. Yes, it's great renewable green energy, but it's a slightly different model than building by building at a local level.
You mentioned in your announcement that you're also partnering with ASB and a tech firm called Tether to install energy monitoring systems. It's a year-long pilot. What's the point, the benefit for yourselves and your tenants in that?
Look, this is a great one. It's actually not something we make money out of. It's something we do because we feel like we should do it, and we think it's good for our tenants. And the reason for that is the best way you can save money on your power is by using less power. And so there's some great technology out there now. I was talking about, you meter this stuff and you can do sub-meters, which is kind of on the lighting circuit in a building or on the heating circuit or the HVAC systems and that sort of thing. Not all buildings have lots of sub-metering in them. Again, it's one of those things where if you put it in the beginning, it's cheap. If you try to retrofit it, it's a bit more expensive. The Tether pilot with ASB is something that ASB has been driving out of their sustainability initiatives. They approached, I think, 50 buildings around the country. We've been given 13 of those pilot program. Ultimately, they're focused on reducing carbon, so the less electricity you use. Even though we're largely green here in New Zealand, we still always have a portion of what we use, which is coal-based or Huntley and other places. So they're focused on trying to reduce that carbon footprint a little bit. And by putting these monitoring devices in, tying it into a good piece of software, what that enables our tenants to do is look at what they're actually doing every day and try and reduce that and optimize it, turn things on and off at the right time. If they are getting spikes in their power bill, depending on what their pricing model is, then they can work with that. They can see it coming. Somebody can get an alert that the lights got left on or the heating's on at the wrong time of day, or it's going to be a nice warm day, so they don't need that. Or it's a cold day, so they don't need the HVAC as much. So we're using technology to try and help our tenants reduce their operating costs. It makes our buildings attractive. We like doing it. It's part of a bigger story. It's got an aspect of good for planet Earth. And it also means that we're not trying to build more generation in New Zealand than what we actually need, wasting whatever any resource or anything that you have to pay for is frustrating. So the CFOs tend to like it, and we think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, although we're still burning 1 million tons of coal each year. So seems like there's some space there, particularly because, a lot of the power usage in these warehouses and factories, light commercial, light industrial, is during the day when people are working there, as opposed to, as you say, early evening, early morning when people are having showers and making cups of tea and putting on the toast. And Nick Maier, the General Manager of FortHill, an industrial property fund. Nick, thank you so much for coming on to this Mini-Hoon here on the Kaka.
Appreciate your time. Thanks for having me, Bernard.